Hello, viewers. I'm glad you're here today. Today, you're going to see me brew some Chinese-style rice wine. I'm going to be doing two special brews. The first one is going to be with these wolfberries, also known as goji berries. This is a traditional Chinese ingredient, goji, and the second brew is going to be with hawthorn, these dried hawthorn. And this is pretty easy to find as tea, and these kind of dried goji berries are also pretty easy to find in a Chinese supermarket. So once again, they're called, so in Chinese they're gouqi. And this is what they look like. And this is the Latin name for Lycium chinense. And these are a specialty of Ningxia region. Okay, so that brings me to another point. Later on in this video, I'm going to tell you a story about Ningxia. I did visit Ningxia, and I did have many goji berries in that region. So I will tell you that story later on in the video. So this brought back a lot of memories, actually. So I'll tell you all about my experience. A little bit about the recipe. I'm going to use these yeast balls. I'm also going to use the rice leaven. This is very reliable, Angel rice leaven, which is basically just powdered yeast balls, but a little more reliable. I'm also going to use some white wine yeast, and this is also for reliability. You can brew just with natural yeast, but this is going to be more reliable. So that's what's coming up in today's video. All right, let's brew. Here's the sweet rice I'm using today. I'm going to measure 2 kilograms and wash it. So while I'm washing the rice here, I might as well tell you my story about Ningxia. So this story takes place in 2002, over 20 years ago. My wife and I and our friend were traveling in China. We're taking a train from Beijing to Lanzhou. We have a stopover for half a day in Yinchuan, and we get to do some amazing things. One thing we see are the old tombs, the Xisha Wangling, very special thing to see there, and also a movie studio. It's a tourist attraction, but they really do film a lot of movies and TV shows there. There's sets in place that you can just walk up to and take your photos and play with the wooden props and put on some costumes and ride a camel. It's actually a great tourist attraction. It's way better than it had to be. At the time, the most famous movie that had been shot there, I think, was Red Sorghum. And we had seen that movie, and that's alcohol related. So this is an alcohol related story, and this movie studio is in a real fortress, and they built sets for all kinds of time periods and villages, and it's very elaborate. And the tour of it is far more complicated than it needed to be. It didn't need to include all these things. It was a great tour, and here's me drinking some red sorghum wine. This is a distilled kind of wine. Look at this joke here. Okay, so this is before I knew anything about brewing Chinese alcohol, but it seems like I was already interested. Another side note, how did we find this place in 2002? It was a complete accident. This is very random traveling, meeting a stranger in a train car and then hopping into their white van and going into the city. But it was all legitimate. They really were travel agents, and they took us to all the real sites of Yinchuan. Both these Chinese wolfberries or goji. So these are a dried berry that's very common as Chinese medicine or in just Chinese food. Every soup we had in Western China had a pile of these goji berries in them. And this was at a time when I was not familiar with, like they weren't a trendy superfood item, in the past 20 years as they've been sort of hyped up. They always were special in traditional Chinese medicine, but they were a common ingredient. It was at every meal contained a lot of these Chinese wolfberries, goji. So this brings back a lot of memories, and it was a great place to see, and it had a lot of good food. And I did pretend to drink the red sorghum wine. So today I'm going to make rice wine with this ingredient. And so rice wine is probably not typical of the region that's more in the north. It's next to Inner Mongolia. So they would have more of the grain-based alcohol rather than the rice-based alcohols. But I think it is an appropriate ingredient. It's a common Chinese item. So I'm going to be making sort of a medicinal type wine. These things are always supposed to be good for you. They're not harmful because they are a common food item. So I'm not worried about that. So I'm going to use quite a bit of this in this goji berry in brewing. And the hawthorn is really really a common kind of fruit to see in China as well. They're like little apples. They're better than crab apples. It's easy to buy them in this form, which is a dried form suitable for tea. So I think this is another suitable, they're a little bit sour. It'll be a suitable brewing ingredient. We'll see how it turns out. Now let the rice soak for 3 hours. It's been 3 hours. Let's drain the rice. Now I'll let the rice drain for 30 minutes. So there are real recipes for Chinese rice wine that use goji, but I'm not sure I can follow them properly. I don't have the original recipe, and the version I see on the internet involves soaking this and then drying it again and then adding it at a later stage in fermentation. So I'm just going to do this in the simplest way possible, steam these along with the rice. So and the ratio in that particular recipe that I was able to see was 1 to 2 for the weight of the goji compared with the weight of the rice, and that's a lot of goji. So I have 8 ounces here, so that's less than that's around 225 grams. So I'll use 100 grams of these goji, and this is what they look like up close. They're dry, but they're a little soft, and they'll spend plenty of time steaming and soaking, so I'm not worried. I will rinse them off before I use them, though. The aroma is a bit sweet. Let's rinse these now. And this is the hawthorn tea I'm using. So just dried hawthorn. Let's see how many grams I have. I have 73 grams here. Might as well use it all. These have a fruity, sweet aroma, a bit like apple, and yeah, should be appropriate. So 73 grams of dried hawthorn. Here's half of the rice. Put about half of that in here. I'm going to put the goji in the middle and cover that up with the rest of the rice. And then wrap that half up. So this is a separate cheesecloth. I'll put half of the remaining rice on this side. Add the hawthorn. And then the last bit of rice on top. Okay, so cover that up. So I'll be able to steam both of these at the same time. That's my strategy here. Be efficient. Okay, the rice will steam for 40 minutes. So while we're steaming, let's get our enzymes and yeast ready. So these are our wine cakes. I'm going to use the strategy of strength with diversity. I'm going to use more than one kind of enzyme and yeast here. For one thing, I want to use some of the many products I have. And also, I'm not sure which ones might be too old or not as strong as they used to be. So I'm going to use a variety. So here's a yeast ball or yeast cake, Shanghai style. I'm going to turn these into powder before I use them. But these weigh 131 grams. Okay, so let's use half of them for each jar here. So that's half. And also this angel rice leaven is very reliable. I'll use half of this packet for each jar. So that's the powdered wine cakes, and now I'm going to add half a packet of the angel rice leaven to each jar. I'll divide this packet of angel rice leaven in two. So the whole packet weighs 8 grams. And I'll put half a teaspoon of the white wine yeast. So half a teaspoon here, half a teaspoon here. Okay, the rice is steamed for 40 minutes, and I'm just going to move it aside and let it sit for 10 more minutes. So these are my cooling racks. I have the cooling rack, the cloth, and then I'll open these up. This is the hawthorn, and I'll spread this out. And the goal is to let this cool. It needs to cool to below 30 degrees Celsius, 86 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, this steamed rice looks good. It's a bit yellowish, a bit hard, but it's exactly the right amount cooked. It's not mushy. The grains of rice are distinct, but it's cooked all the way through. Okay, so the goji has steamed well. It completely softened up. The goji are completely steamed. They're mushy. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know they would behave that way. So it'll probably take about an hour to cool down. So now it's cooled down and I can dust the cooled rice with the powdered wine cakes and put it in the fermentation jar. If I want to talk about categorizing Chinese rice wine recipes, I'd say there are two kinds of recipes. There's a cold weather kind and a hot weather kind of recipe. And the hot weather kind of recipes, you would use very little water and you would never touch the brew. You would let it, you would keep the brew covered. You wouldn't look at it or touch it at all. No stirring, no touching. And very little water, and it would ferment at a relatively high temperature. And then a cold weather recipe would require more water, and you would have to stir it. You would have to touch it. And since it's relatively cold right now, this is a cold weather type of recipe. Of course, that's oversimplified, but that's what I've seen in reading different Chinese rice wine recipes. There is really a big difference between doing it in warm weather or cold weather. Okay, I'll add the leftover powdered wine cake on top because I'm going to also add 800 milliliters of water. And the reason I'm adding that much water is because this is a cold weather recipe. And I am going to mix this by hand because even though I think I did a good job at distributing the powder in with the rice, I really want every grain of rice to get in contact with it. And that's going to require me to stick my hand in the jar and mix it up. So I'm going to separate every grain of rice. Okay, now I'll do the hawthorn. And 800 milliliters of water. And now they go in the cabinet. After putting these in the bottle, the goji rice wine and the hawthorn rice wine. And you can see they've settled nicely. Just a bit cloudy, but really settled well. I am going to try the more clear layer, and I'm also going to mix it up and drink it as a cloudy rice wine as well. So these are two kinds of huangjiu, fermented rice wine, fermented Chinese rice wine. Is general word for that is huangjiu. So today we have the goji version and the hawthorn version. So there's no carbonation in this at all. It fermented for 28 days. The goji color is really quite dark. With the rice, it's more orange, but the wine itself is quite dark, more brown. Okay, it's quite fragrant, peachy kind of fragrance, maybe even soapy. That's unusual, but let's taste. Oh, so this has a strong taste. It's a bit syrupy in texture, a bit tart or bitter at the beginning, but there is sweetness. Okay, and it is fruity. Tastes fairly high in alcohol. So what I taste at the beginning is some sweetness and sort of a medicinal kind of bitterness, and then a lot of fruitiness, and the texture is reasonably syrupy. So it's not totally like water. And there's plenty of alcohol. It ends. There's a bit of a nutty taste at the end, which is like a kind of taste you would get in a dry sherry. Considering this is 3 days old, this has a great flavor. It's not particularly harsh, and it tastes rich, fruity, and there's a lot of substance to it. So that's really nice. So now let's try the hawthorn. Less colored, so the cloudiness is a bit more noticeable. Fruity aroma. Aroma is more like pears, pretty light pear aroma. The flavor too is more like, at the very beginning, is more like a pear. I was expecting this to be more like an apple, just because these little hawthorn fruits look like little apples. But the fruitiness, it's a little bit tart at the end. Actually, the end is good. Tartness at the end, fairly crisp. That's, again, it's only been 3 days since this was bottled and put in the fridge. Surprising it tastes this clean. Yeah, so I would serve either of these to anyone. I think anyone I serve this to would find it interesting, even if they're not into these particular flavors. But yeah, this is nice and fruity, but there is real alcohol in this. Okay, nice. So, okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix this up and have a cloudy rice wine. So cloudy rice wine is something you would consume more quickly. The clear rice wine, you could pour that off and keep it for years. You could age that, especially if it's heat treated. So this is nice and fruity, but But I want to taste what the cloudy version of this tastes like with all the rice sediments. And the aroma is like overripe fruit now. Maybe with that extra ripe peachiness. Okay, and of course the texture is thicker, but it's not unpleasant. It's very smooth texture. The rice sediment does bring a different dimension to things, and it doesn't do any harm to the flavor at all. Yeah, still some sweetness. You notice the tartness, some bitterness at the beginning. Yeah, it ends well. Yeah, for these two wines, I really noticed the alcohol more. Goji rice wine does seem to be stronger in alcohol. And that's something that can happen. Sometimes these additional added ingredients can change the fermentation. Just incidentally, accidentally, these ingredients like goji or hawthorn could affect how the yeast produces alcohol. And yeah, this in particular tastes strong, even with the rice sediments mixed in. The color is great. Now it's a very orange color. It tastes even richer than before. Very smooth, but there is some thickness to it. Okay, so that's great. I really enjoy this goji rice wine. Now the hawthorn, let's mix this one up. So this is going to be a beige rice wine. Okay, so let's enjoy beige, and still a fruity aroma. Yeah, and nice. The tartness is not just a citrus tartness, something a bit milder, but it is a fruity tartness. Yeah, this also is very enjoyable to drink, and the texture again is smooth. I can feel the thickness, but the texture is great. No problems there. And a nice and remarkably clean. Both of these have remarkably clean finishes. So today I got to taste both of my Chinese huangjiu brews with the goji berry and the hawthorn. Very nice. Both of these have great flavors, and I think those are good ingredients to use. Using goji berries might sound a bit fancy, and I think it is, but it is a standard medicinal ingredient, and it's used very widely in Chinese cooking, especially in certain regions. And hawthorn is a ubiquitous kind of fruit used for snacks and all kinds of things, and so it's a very Chinese ingredient as well. So I think both of these are suitable ingredients, and I did read about some recipes, some Chinese recipes that involve these, but I didn't follow them because I didn't have all the details. But this is my version of goji rice wine and a hawthorn rice wine, and they both turned out. So I'm very pleased, and yeah, they're so if I encourage you to follow my example, do your own experiments with brewing with these ingredients. I think you'll like it. So thank you for watching.